At WinOwl, we tell stories that aren't always pretty, but almost always necessary. Stories that could have happened to your neighbor, your sister, or to you. If you like those kinds of tales that feel like a midnight confession, hit subscribe to the WinOwl channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear they're not crazy, that what they're living through has a name and consequences. Here we talk about betrayal, control, about love that breaks in silence, and about people who one day decide they're done keeping their heads down. Today I'm going to tell you the story of Kelly, a first-time mom accused of being a gold digger, humiliated over and over again by her mother-in-law while her husband looked the other way. A story where cameras, notebook entries, and saved messages become more important than hugs. A story where the rejection of a controlling mother ends up provoking an even bigger rejection, that of her own son, and that of the justice system. In the end, you'll be the one to decide whether Kelly left too late, too soon, or just in time. If you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to WinOwl, turn on the little bell, and leave your like. I promise you, this story is not one you'll forget easily. And if you know someone with a complicated mother-in-law, share it with them, even if it's in secret. I'm going to say this straight, there are two kinds of people who wreck your life. The ones who do it all at once, and the ones who do it slowly, like a leaky tap over your head. Nora Hastings was one of the second kind. And Arthur, her son, was the hand that never turned off the faucet. My name is Owen, and if I'm telling you this, it's not because I enjoy drama. I'm telling you because I was there. Because I watched a woman slowly come apart, in a robe and with dark circles under her eyes, while everyone around her pretended it was just a phase. And because even now I still ask myself if I did enough, or if I was a coward too. Tell me something before we go on. If you see someone you care about being destroyed by their in-laws, do you step in all the way, or do you back off because it's between them as a couple? What would you have done? I met Kelly long before she was called Hastings. We worked in the same office, a cold glass building where the air conditioning was always turned up way too high. She wore big sweaters, always holding a folder tight against her chest, with that look of someone thinking about 10 different things at once. Kelly came from a modest family. Maybe that's why, when she met Arthur at a company dinner, a lot of people made the same comment, "You got lucky." He was the son of Nora Hastings, owner of half the fancy neighborhood and of the other half of Arthur's emotional problems. Handsome, well-mannered, one of those guys who speaks softly and makes people laugh without trying. At first glance, a good catch. The first times I saw them together, I thought they balanced each other out. She kept them grounded, he brought a sense of safety. She watched the numbers, he'd say, "Don't worry, everything's going to be fine." You know that bright stage in a relationship, when there are no emotional bills due yet? They were right there. Or so it seemed. The first time Kelly spoke to me about Nora, it wasn't with hatred. It was with caution. "She's intense," she told me one afternoon, in the office cafeteria. "Like from another generation. She loves Arthur a lot, in her own way." I didn't know that her own way yet. I didn't know that intense meant phone calls at 6 in the morning to ask what they were having for breakfast. It meant showing up at their apartment with a copy of their keys just in case. It meant smelling the fabric softener on their towels and deciding Kelly's choice wasn't what people from a good home use. Let me ask you something, how many red flags do you ignore at the beginning just because you're in love? How many invasions do you rename affection just so you don't lose the peace? Kelly and Arthur got married in a small ceremony. He insisted on keeping it intimate, so my mom doesn't get worked up. I was one of the few friends invited. I remember Kelly walking in wearing a simple dress, the afternoon light pouring in through the big windows, her hair pulled back like she was afraid of taking up too much space. Arthur didn't let go of her hand the whole time. Nora, on the other hand, took up all the air in the room. From my table I could hear her sharp voice when she saw the bouquet. "Very modest, isn't it?" she whispered to another guest. "But well, she doesn't come from much." I didn't like it. But I told myself all mothers-in-law make comments. That it was normal. That it wasn't my place. That "it's not my place" becomes a sentence that weighs like stone when you remember it years later. Then came the honeymoon, the new apartment, the smiling photos on social media. And, not long after, the news. "I'm pregnant," Kelly told me, crying over a video call. "Owen, I'm scared." "Scared of what?" I asked, smiling, trying to share her joy. "Of Nora. And of Arthur not standing up for me." Right there, in that sentence, was the whole story I'm about to tell you. The pregnancy wasn't out of a movie. Kelly threw up a lot, slept little, and worked too much. Nora, instead of caring for her, criticized her. "She called me today to tell me I shouldn't keep working," she told me one day. "That decent women stay at home, that if I lose the baby it'll be my fault, because I'm too ambitious." "And Arthur?" I asked. She went quiet for a moment. "He says that's just how she talks. That I should ignore her." "Would you be able to ignore someone telling you every single day that if anything goes wrong, it'll be your fault?" One day, Kelly sent me a voice note. Her voice sounded broken, but controlled. "Owen, I need you to come over when you can. I need to talk to someone who isn't on their side." I went that same night. When she opened the door, she was wearing loose pajamas and had her hair pulled up in a messy bun. There were shadows under her eyes, but she still had that way of looking straight at you, like she refused to lie to anyone. The apartment smelled like soup and lemon. The TV was off. Arthur wasn't there. "He stayed over at his mom's," she said, when she saw the question on my face. "He says Nora feels lonely." We ate almost in silence. I watched her touch her belly every now and then, with this protective, almost animal gesture. At one point our hands brushed when we both reached for the same spoon. It was the slightest touch, but I felt the electricity shoot up my arm. She felt it too. She pulled her hand back quickly and took a deep breath. "Sorry," she murmured. "You don't have anything to apologize for," I told her, a little too slowly. That was the first moment I realized something I didn't want to see. I was starting to care about her in a way I had no right to. Has it ever happened to you? Falling for someone who's already tangled up in another story, under someone else's last name? Not long before the baby was born, Nora exploded in a more direct way. Kelly had planned a small get-together to show them the baby's room. Nothing fancy, a crib, some clouds painted on the wall, a slow-turning mobile of stars. "She painted it herself," I said, almost proud, even though I had no reason to be. Nora moved around the room touching things, lifting tags, checking the quality. "Everything's very basic," she said. "But I suppose with Arthur's money it can be upgraded. If it weren't for him, this child would be born in some rental place, right, Kelly?" The tension froze in the air. Arthur made a little gesture, like he was about to say "Mom, please," but he stayed silent. I looked at both of them, waiting for someone to set a boundary. "Nora," Kelly began, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Hastings," Nora corrected her, without even looking at her. "I still don't know if I can trust you. You show up out of nowhere, no family, no name, and suddenly you're pregnant. There are women who make a business out of that, you know?" There it was, the unspoken word hanging in the room. Gold digger. I took a step forward. "With all due respect, Mrs. Hastings, Kelly has been working since before she met Arthur. She pays her own bills. She's not here for his money." She looked at me like I was an insect. "And you, Owen, are just the friend. Don't get involved in what you don't understand." Arthur cleared his throat. "Mom, enough." The word was soft. Way too soft. Like throwing a pillow at a concrete wall. Nora smiled, but she didn't back down. "I'm just saying that if later we want a DNA test, it shouldn't be a big deal, right? Clear things keep families clean." Kelly pressed her hands over her belly. I watched her eyes fill with tears, but she didn't cry. That night, while Nora and Arthur left, she stayed standing in the doorway, staring at the empty hallway. "Did you hear what she said, Owen?" she asked at last. "Yes." "Do you think Arthur defended me?" I bit my tongue before saying what I really thought. "Not the way you deserved." That was when something occurred to me, something that sounded cold even to my own ears, but ended up saving her. Kelly, I want you to start writing everything down. Everything. Dates, times, exact words. And if you can, record audio. Messages. Whatever you can. She looked at me like I was talking about a spy movie. What for? In case one day you need to prove you're not crazy. Let me ask you, does it sound extreme to you to start documenting violence when there aren't even any shouting matches yet? Or do you think that's exactly when you should start? The birth was rough. Hours of pain, bright white lights, nurses coming and going. I stayed in the waiting room with a cup of cold coffee in my hands. Arthur paced back and forth, nervous, checking his phone. When Leanne was finally born, with that metallic newborn cry, I thought maybe things would change. That Nora would soften. That Arthur would finally step up and be a man. It's funny how we keep insisting on imagining happy endings, even when the story has already given us more than enough clues. Those first days at the hospital were a strange mix. Kelly, exhausted, hair stuck to her forehead, learning how to breastfeed, learning how to sleep 2 hours in a row. Arthur, at first, seemed fascinated. I watched him hold Leanne in his arms, looking at him like he'd just discovered a treasure. And Nora. Nora played the perfect grandma in front of the nurses. She brought balloons, flowers, candy. She smiled, told jokes. But when she was alone with Kelly, her voice changed. "Look at those bags under your eyes, dear," she said once, while I pretended not to hear. "You don't look good. Maybe you shouldn't have worked so late." Babies feel those things. Kelly had her phone in her hand. She was squeezing it hard, like she was holding on to more than just a device. When Nora left the room, she looked at me. "Do you think she hates me?" she asked. "I think she needs to control everything," I answered. "And you're the one thing she can't control." That conversation ended up recorded. Not because I had foreseen everything, but because by then Kelly had already listened to me. From the first real, heavy humiliation, she started keeping records. Notes in a notebook she hid in her sock drawer. Phone audios she'd start recording before Nora came over to the apartment. Text messages where Arthur asked her to understand his mother. At that point, someone else joined this story, Paige. Paige was a college friend of Kelly's, a cybersecurity specialist. One of those people who knows where everything is, who said what, on which date, at what time. When we told her what was going on, she didn't act shocked. She didn't say, "You're overreacting." She just asked, "Do you want to do this right, or do you just want to vent?" "We want this not to destroy her," I answered, before Kelly could say anything. It was Paige who taught her how to back everything up. How to upload files to the cloud with harmless-sounding names. How to create an alternate email in case Arthur ever tried to go through her phone. I'm not exaggerating, in that world of screens, the difference between having evidence and having nothing could mean losing her child. Does it feel cold to talk about evidence when what we're really talking about is tears and sleepless nights? Maybe. But sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to turn it into a case. The following months were a war of attrition. Nora would show up without warning. She'd open the door with her key. If she found Kelly with messy hair or the house out of order, she'd say, "That's how women who marry for money are lazy. Poor my grandson, growing up in this chaos." If Leanne cried too much, she'd imply that maybe the baby could feel something wasn't right with his mother. That maybe, deep down, Kelly just wasn't maternal. Every phrase, every look, emptied out Kelly's confidence in herself a little more. Arthur, meanwhile, moves between them like an exhausted diplomat. He said he didn't want problems, that he worked too much, that he was tired. At night, he slept on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. Most of the time, when Leanne woke up crying, it was Kelly who got up. Arthur just kept on sleeping, as if the cries were coming from another city. One night, I was in the living room, helping her put together a new dresser. The baby was asleep in his crib, breathing fast. Kelly stood there watching Leanne for a long time, leaning against the doorframe. She was wearing a loose t-shirt and cotton shorts, her hair fell free down her back. The warm light from the floor lamp painted soft shadows on her skin. When she came closer to help me hold the wood in place, her arm brushed mine. I felt the heat of her body, the faint smell of soap and milk. We were so close I could hear her breathing, that tired but steady rhythm. "You know what's the worst part?" she whispered, without looking at me. "What?" "That I'm starting to believe her. That sometimes I think Leanne really would be better off without me." I felt this almost physical urge to wrap my arms around her waist, pull her against my chest, tell her no, that she was out of her mind, that she was the best mother I'd ever seen. Instead, I gripped the screwdriver tighter. "Don't ever say that again," I said quietly. "Nora is messing with your head. But you know your son. You carried him. He knows you, not her." Kelly turned a little. Our faces were just a few inches apart. I saw her dry lips, her reddened eyes. For a second, all the noise of the city vanished, no traffic, no neighbors, no TV. Just the sound of our breathing, mixing in the air between us. "Owen," she whispered. I don't know what she was going to say, because right then Leanne let out a little whimper from the crib. Kelly pulled away like she'd been burned and rushed to him, with that urgent kind of love you can't fake. I stayed there, my hands sweaty, wondering if I was a hero for not doing anything, or a coward for not telling her everything. Let me throw this one at you: when you care about someone who's married, is the purest kind of love the one that stays silent, or the one that risks blowing everything up? The big fracture came the day of Leanne's baptism. Nora insisted that the ceremony be held at the church she'd been going to since she was a girl. She insisted on the guest list, on the banquet, on the baby's outfit. Kelly, exhausted, gave in on almost everything except one thing: she wanted to choose the godmother. She chose Paige. "She's not family," Nora protested, jaw tight. "She is my family," Kelly answered, for the first time with real firmness. "The family I chose." The tension hung in the air, but the agreement stood, or at least it looked that way. On the day of the baptism, Nora showed up in an expensive dress with a perfect hairstyle. Kelly, on the other hand, wore a simple dress, soft fabric that suited a body still in recovery. Leanne, in Arthur's arms, seemed oblivious to everything, sucking his fingers. The ceremony went by without issues, right up until the toast at the reception. Nora took the floor. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my grandson's life," she said, smiling. "Another Hastings, with all the blood and lineage of this family." There was applause. Then her voice shifted just a shade. "And I also want to say that in this family, we've always been very clear. We've never had problems with gold diggers, you all know what I mean." Several heads turned toward Kelly. The silence was one of those that makes its own sound. "But of course," Nora added, raising her glass, "we're trusting that this child really is blood of our blood. And if there are ever doubts, it can always be confirmed with a test. Science is wonderful." Kelly went pale. I saw her squeezing the napkin so hard it tore. Arthur tried to laugh it off. "Mom, for God's sake," he muttered. "It's a joke." "A joke?" Kelly said quietly. "You think that's a joke?" Paige already had her phone recording in her purse. Not because she knew exactly this would happen, but because it had become routine by then. Every event with Nora was potentially evidence. That video, with the clear audio of Nora practically calling her a gold digger in front of the whole family, would become one of the most valuable pieces later. But in that moment, we weren't strategists. We were people being humiliated in the middle of a party. Kelly stood up from the table and walked out to the garden. I went after her. I found her leaning against a wall, her eyes unfocused. "I don't want Leanne to grow up hearing that," she said, still not looking at me. "He's not going to grow up hearing that," I told her. "I promise you." "And who's going to stop it? Arthur? That man who laughs when they call me a gold digger in front of his family?" The way she said that man told me something had broken. That night, when they got back home, something happened that changed the tone of the story. Nora showed up an hour after they did, without warning, like always. She started gathering glasses and plates, criticizing the event, saying the catering had been beneath the Hastings name. Kelly, drained, stood up to her. "Mrs. Hastings, don't ever again imply that Leon isn't Arthur's son. Not in front of him, not in front of anyone." Nora turned slowly. "As long as you live off my son, I'll say whatever I want." Kelly took a deep breath. "I was working before I met Arthur. And I can go back to work." Nora took a step toward her, breaking into her personal space. "And you really think you can support my grandson on your little office salary?" Arthur was in the living room, staring at his phone. He didn't get up. Kelly picked up her phone, which she'd left recording the conversation from the moment she'd seen Nora walk in. She set it down on the table, in plain sight. "Whatever you say tonight, a judge is going to hear it one day if necessary," she said, with the firmest voice she'd had all night. Nora let out a loud laugh. "A judge? You?" She leaned in closer. "Listen, girl. If you ever leave my son, I'll take the baby from you. Arthur has more money, more resources, more lawyers. You'll be left with your little notebooks and your recordings, but without Leanne. And I promise you, if I have to, I'll say you're unstable. An unstable mother doesn't get custody." That "I'll take the baby from you" was the sentence that finally lit something inside Kelly. And it was exactly the kind of threat Paige had told us needed to be saved. After Nora left, slamming the door, Kelly locked herself in the bathroom. Arthur waited a few minutes and then came over to me. "Do you think my mom went too far?" he asked, like he was talking about the weather. "Arthur, your mom just threatened to help take Leanne away from her. A mother like that doesn't just go too far." He made an annoyed face. "It's just that you guys don't get her. She's always been intense. But deep down she wants what's best." "What's best for who?" I asked. "Because it's definitely not for Kelly." He looked at me with a mix of reproach and exhaustion. "You always get too involved, Owen. This is between us as a couple." There it was again, that phrase. Between us as a couple. As if couples lived inside some sealed bubble, untouched by the world, the law, mental health. Let me ask you, where do you think couples' business ends and everybody's business begins? When there's a child in the middle? When there are clear threats? Or way before that? The following days were a tense calm. Kelly stopped talking much. She moved on autopilot, caring for Leanne, doing housework, staying quiet. Until one afternoon, Paige called me. "We have enough," she said, without preamble. "Enough for what?" "To file for a restraining order. Maybe not against Arthur yet, but at least against Nora. And if Arthur keeps this up, against him too." I stayed quiet. Not because I doubted her, but because I understood the weight of that sentence. There was no going back after that. That night we met at Kelly's apartment. Leon was asleep in his room, the baby monitor on. The soft sound of his breathing was the background to our war council. On the dining table, Paige had laid out a laptop and several folders. "Here," she said, pointing at the screen, "I've got the recordings of the verbal humiliation, the time she called you a gold digger, the hints about paternity, the veiled threats about taking the baby. They're dated, organized. We also have Arthur's text messages minimizing everything and refusing to set boundaries. And here," she opened another folder, "the notes you took, Kelly. Dates, times, witnesses. It's not perfect, but it's more than many women have when they walk into a courtroom." Kelly stared at everything with a mix of hope and terror. "Do you really think?" She didn't finish the sentence. "I think," Paige said, "that if you stay here, Nora is going to get what she wants, for everyone to believe you're unbalanced. She's already provoking you. If one day you lose control, if you shout, if you shove a chair, they'll be recording you. And then all of her previous abuse won't matter." There was a long silence. "And Arthur?" I finally asked. "Where does he fit into all this?" Paige sighed. "Arthur has a problem, He's a man raised to obey his mother and protect his last name before his wife. He's not a monster, but he's not innocent either. His inaction is also violence. If Kelly decides to move forward, we have to include his negligence. Not to take Leanne away from him, but to protect them from his lack of boundaries. Kelly rubbed her forehead. I don't want Leanne to grow up without a father. He won't grow up without a father, Paige said. He'll grow up without a man who lets his grandmother humiliate his mother in her own home. The bluntness of that line left the three of us staring at each other. I realized Paige was saying what I hadn't dared to. That night, after Paige left, Kelly stayed by the window. The city glowed beneath us like a swarm of sick fireflies. I walked up to her, without touching her. I know it's scary, I said. You have no idea, she murmured. I'm scared of Nora, I'm scared of Arthur, I'm scared of making a mistake. But what terrifies me most is Leanne growing up thinking this is normal. She turned toward me. Her eyes were shining with tears, but her jaw was set. Owen, tell me the truth. If you were me, would you run? I felt a knot in my throat. That was the question I'd been dodging for months. If I were you, I answered, I wouldn't leave my life in the hands of anyone who doesn't know how to defend it. And Arthur doesn't defend you. Kelly took a step toward me. We were so close I could see the pulse beating fast in her neck. She placed her hand on my chest, just barely resting there, like she was reaching for an anchor. The warmth of her fingers came right through my shirt. Thank you for not lying to me, she whispered. Her hand stayed there a few seconds too long. I felt a hot wave climb up my body, a mix of desire and shame. I could have hugged her, kissed her forehead, her mouth. I didn't. I just lifted my hand and laid it gently over hers, pressing it to my chest for a moment. I felt her breathing quicken. Then she pulled her hand away, like she'd just touched something forbidden. I have to go check on Leanne, she said softly, retreating toward the baby's room. I stayed alone by the window, the ghost of her touch burning through me. And I understood that my role in this story wasn't to be the man who stole her from Arthur, but the one who helped her get free of him. Do you think that's a form of love too? The legal process began early, on a gray morning. Kelly and Paige went down to the courthouse with all the folders, copies of the recordings, printed messages. I stayed with Leanne, playing on the floor with colored blocks, trying not to picture her there in front of some clerk who would listen, one by one, to Nora's insults. That night, Kelly came back with a tired face, but a new spark in her eyes. They agreed to review the case, she said, dropping the papers on the table. They're going to issue a temporary protection order while they investigate. Temporary against who? I asked. Against Nora, she replied. And a formal warning for Arthur. Her lips trembled when she said her husband's name. We had to tell them everything, she went on. How she walks in without permission, how she calls me a gold digger, how she hints Leanne might not be his, the threats. And also his inaction. The lawyer said that matters, that the court needs to understand he knew and did nothing. And how did you feel? I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. Kelly dropped into a chair. Like I was betraying my own home, but at the same time, like for the first time someone actually believed me. You, listening to this, tell me, is it betrayal to ask for help when the very family that should have your back is the first one holding you under? The next big moment was the notification. I was there when it arrived. The doorbell rang and, when we opened, there was an officer with an envelope in the face of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Nora and Arthur were in the living room because they'd come to talk, according to a prior message Arthur had sent. Mrs. Nora Hastings, the officer read, you are hereby notified that, as of this date, a temporary restraining order is issued forbidding you from approaching closer than 100 meters to Mrs. Kelly or the minor Leanne, unless otherwise ordered by the court. Nora's face twisted into a mask of disbelief. What is this nonsense, she spat. Arthur froze. Kelly, he said, as if he didn't understand. What did you do? Kelly had the papers in her hand. Her fingers were shaking, but her voice came out surprisingly steady. I protected my son. And myself. From my mother? Arthur sounded like he'd just been slapped. She's your mother-in-law, not a criminal. We have recordings, Arthur, page cut in, she was there with us. Videos. Messages. These aren't opinions, they're facts. Nora took an instinctive step toward Kelly, but the officer raised his hand. Ma'am, I remind you that approaching her may constitute contempt of court. She looked at him like he was trash. You don't know who you're dealing with, she said. Ma'am, I don't care who you are, he replied, weary. I'm just doing my job. Nora turned to her son. Are you going to allow this, Arthur? For a woman who only wants your money to treat me like a criminal? Arthur looked at Kelly. That look was maybe the last chance at something. The last opportunity to stand beside her. All he had to do was say, Mom, stop. You went too far. Kelly is my wife and the mother of my son. All he had to do was, for once, choose the right side. Instead, he said, Kelly, withdraw this. You're overreacting. You're letting your friends get in your head. The silence that followed was heavy. Kelly took a deep breath, like a diver. She looked at him with a calm I'd never seen in her before. Arthur, when your mother called me a gold digger, you laughed. When she implied Leanne might not be your son, you stayed quiet. When she said she'd take the baby away from me, you said she was just being intense. Today they're telling you that all of that is enough for a judge to consider us victims. And still, the first thing you think is that I'm exaggerating. Her voice only broke on the very last word, but she held herself up. I'm not withdrawing anything, she added. And I'm filing for divorce. The word divorce fell into the room like a silent bomb. Arthur stepped back, as if pushed. Divorce, he repeated. Yes, Kelly said. I don't want Leanne growing up watching his mother get humiliated at every meal. Or watching his father stay silent. Nora let out a bitter laugh. I told you, Arthur. I told you, she shouted, pointing at Kelly. This woman only wanted a child and a monthly check. Now she's going to bleed you dry with this custody thing. Kelly looked at her with something that seemed more like exhaustion than hatred. I don't want your money, Mrs. Hastings, she said. I want peace. And I want Leanne to know his mother didn't tolerate him being used as a weapon. In that instant, something inside me clicked into place. All the cold strategy, all the recordings, the notes, the digital backups made sense. They weren't weapons to destroy, but tools to draw a line. The divorce and custody process wasn't quick or clean. There were hearings, statements, psychological assessments. Arthur, advised by his mother's lawyers, tried at first to fight for shared custody. His arguments were predictable, that Kelly was influenced by friends, that she was emotionally unstable, that she was blocking the bond with the grandmother. But then the evidence came in. In the courtroom, in front of the judge, the recordings played one by one, Nora saying gold digger, DNA test, I'll take the baby from you. The baptism video was shown, with the whole family listening in silence. Arthur's messages were read aloud, the ones where he minimized everything, asking Kelly not to make a scene. The judge, a man in his 50s with the tired face of someone who's seen far too many similar stories, took his time. Mr. Hastings, he said in one of the hearings, are you aware that by failing to set boundaries with your mother, you participated in the psychological abuse of your wife? Arthur lowered his gaze. I didn't want problems, he muttered. And yet you got them anyway, the judge replied. You had the responsibility to protect the space of your home. You did not. When everything was finally over, months later, the ruling was clear, full custody for Kelly, supervised visitation for Arthur for a period of time. And something that surprised even Paige, a restraining order against him as well, limited to the home environment, until he could prove he'd effectively set boundaries with his mother and begun therapy. In other words, Nora couldn't come near Leanne. And Arthur couldn't come near Kelly without the court's conditions. The rejection of the controlling mother had bounced back at her like a mirror. She, who was so afraid that a gold digger would take her son and grandson away from her, ended up being the first one locked out. There's a day, not long after we got the ruling, that I remember clearly. We were in Kelly's new apartment, smaller, with bare walls. Leanne, now a little older, was pushing a toy cart across the floor. There were boxes stacked in the corners, the smell of fresh paint and coffee in the air. Kelly sat down next to me on the floor, her back against the wall. She was wearing an old t-shirt and cotton pants, bare feet. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders. "You know what's the saddest part," she said, watching Leanne. "That I'm not happy I won. I'm relieved. But I'm not happy." "That's normal," I said. "No one grows up dreaming about winning a lawsuit against their husband and mother-in-law." She sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something different. If I could have loved more, endured more, explained better." "You explained a lot of times," I told her. "The problem is they didn't want to understand. They wanted to rule." A comfortable silence settled between us. Leanne ran his cart into my leg and burst out laughing. I picked him up and he nestled against my chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. Kelly looked at us, with a mix of tenderness and melancholy. Her eyes dropped for a second to the way I held him, to the way my shirt clung to my body from playing with Leanne, to the light sheen of sweat on my neck. Then her gaze came back to my face. "You've been here for every key moment," she said quietly. I didn't know where else to go, I joked, trying to lighten the weight of her words. She didn't smile. "I deserve someone who does that for me," she went on. "And you deserve to love without hiding behind case files." The sentence nailed me to the spot. She knew. Maybe she'd always known. "Kelly," I began. She reached out and laid her hand over mine, resting on the handle of the toy cart. Her fingers threaded through mine with a new kind of familiarity. The touch was gentle, but heavy. I felt the warmth of her skin, the quick pulse at the base of her wrist. Our silence filled up with more than unspoken words. We stayed like that for a few seconds, too long to be accidental, too short to be a promise. "Don't say anything yet," she whispered. "I'm still learning how to be on my own. How to be a mother without asking permission. Maybe one day I'll ask you if you want to be more than the friend who saved my life. But today I just want you to keep being here." I squeezed her hand, not letting go. "I can do that," I said. "What would you do in my place? Would you confess everything right there, risking mixing her healing process with your own desire? Or would you stay by her side and let time decide?" Months have passed since then. The restraining order is still in place. Arthur sees Leanne in a neutral space, with someone present. I've heard he started going to therapy, though I don't know if out of conviction or because the judge pushed him to. Nora, from what I hear, badmouths Kelly in the same circles where she used to brag about my son's wife. But she no longer has the keys to any door that matters. Kelly works part-time now. She's picked up some projects she'd put on hold. Sometimes, when I pass by her place, I find her sitting on the floor with Leanne on her lap, reading him a book, her soft voice filling the room with stories that are actually worth hearing. She looks tired, yes, but also different. There's a kind of clean tiredness that comes from holding up your own life without anyone pushing you down. And me. I'm still here. I'm not her boyfriend, not her secret lover, not some movie hero. I'm the man who loves her with a mix of calm and fear, who learned to use the cold edge of reason to help her get out of a place where all the warmth was pure suffocation. Sometimes at night, when Leanne is already asleep and she and I stay in the kitchen sharing a coffee, our eyes hold a little longer than they should. I see how her fingers play with the rim of the mug, how her lips glisten with the hot sip, how her t-shirt tightens against her chest when she leans forward. My body reacts, of course. But I also feel something deeper, respect for her process, and fear of turning her into a trophy after we fought so hard for her not to be one. I think that's what makes this story different. It doesn't end with a passionate kiss or a spectacular revenge. It ends, for now, with a woman who said enough, and with a man who chose to walk beside her without taking ownership of her victory. The rejection from the controlling mother was only the beginning. The truly hard part was getting Kelly to stop rejecting herself, to stop doubting her own voice, her right to be a mother without being examined as if she had a price tag hanging from her neck. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I'm telling you this softly, like we were alone together in a dark room. I don't know if I did everything right. I don't know if I should have spoken sooner, if I should have shouted more, if I should have said I love you that night by the window. But I do know that, for the first time in a long time, I sleep a little easier knowing that she and Leanne no longer live in fear. And that, for me, already means something. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in Kelly's place? Would you have stayed longer to save the family? Do you think Arthur deserves a second chance as a father, even after failing so badly as a husband? And what would you do if you were me? Tell her how you feel, or let life rearrange things on its own. Leave me your answers in the comments. I want to read your perspective, your advice, your criticism. Sometimes other people's eyes help us see mistakes we've been blind to. If this story stirred something inside you, subscribe to the WinOwl channel, like this video, and share it with someone dealing with difficult in-laws, an invasive mother-in-law, or a partner who doesn't stand up the way they should. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone, and that there are ways to protect yourself, even when the enemy sleeps in the room next door.